Development Committee. Okay, item number one.
Item number one is a city attorney report and ordinance relative to establishing a voluntary disclosure program to provide relief to taxpayers who voluntarily disclose previously unknown tax liabilities.
There was a request to continue this item by BTAC, which is fine with me. So we'll continue that for the next meeting.
Okay.
Were you not notified?
I'm sorry?
Were you not notified?
We're just notified.
Okay, I apologize.
Well, we're here for several matters.
Okay. You're here for several matters?
Yes.
As well? Okay, so you were coming anyway, okay. So we'll continue item number one until the next meeting. Item number two?
Item number two is a city attorney report and ordinance relative to amending section 21.05 and section 21.16 of the Los Angeles Municipal
Item number
Code.
one, Jessica, do you want to hold your comments until it comes back? Who's Jessica? Okay, thank you. Okay, item number two, I'm sorry.
To clarify the periods for which businesses can be liable for business taxes without affecting other tax collection periods.
Okay, any reports on this?
Yes, this matter had come back for an amendment. It had already been before this committee once.
Okay.
This had already been before the committee once. It's returning for one item only, and it's subparagraph B, which deals with the ability of the Office of Finance to make assessments when there is a substantial understatement of tax on the applications or renewal certificates of a taxpayer. This will allow the Office of Finance to make an assessment within 6 years of the filing of a return where there's a substantial understatement of tax.
Okay, is BTAC present? Okay, not hearing from them, I assume this matter is fine with them.
I believe the Office of Finance has a comment to make to the ordinance that we drafted.
Please.
Yes, Ed Cabrera, Office of Finance. We just asked for one modification. The language in the draft ordinance as it is applicable to the substantial understatement references when a taxpayer or a person files a timely renewal. This should actually reference whether they file timely or untimely. So whether they file the renewal by the due date or whether they're late, the substantial understatement should be applicable. And we would ask that the city attorney be instructed to make that correction.
Okay, now, when did you decide that?
Excuse me, well, we reviewed it and we noticed that there was
When did you review it?
we had reviewed it and we had discussions with city attorney.
When?
Excuse me, we've had ongoing discussions with city attorney. This particular issue came to my attention today, and we did notify city attorney of the concern.
The problem is I have no way to vet it. Two of my colleagues aren't here, and BTAC isn't here, so I don't know what their reaction to that would be. Does anybody else want to weigh in and give me some advice here? Nobody's checked in with my staff. Have nobody mentioned it to my staff? I mean, so what would the effect of that be, Mr. City Attorney?
This would be the effect. Right now, this would only apply if a taxpayer timely filed.
No, I got that.
So otherwise,
what's the
this would apply
practical
whenever.
effect?
This would then apply whenever. So if a taxpayer came in, 10 years late and filed their return late, right now, the time that the Office of Finance could make an assessment would start to run 3 years after they file that return. And this substantial understatement period of 6 years would never apply. If we make this amendment, then if they did make a substantial understatement of tax on that late filed return, they would then have 6 years to file after that. So,
So it's a substantive change.
it is.
And I think it's unfair for you to come forward without telling my staff in the middle of a committee meeting making substantive changes, not technical changes, but, I mean, we would have to research the record to find out what the direction was from staff, tell you the truth. I don't, or from this committee. I don't remember. So we're going to have to hold the matter for a couple of weeks, and ask you to work with my staff to clarify that. Okay. I mean, is it a political position, or has this been vetted with the other parties?
We have had, this matter has been discussed with BTAC.
Not discussed, vetted. There's a big difference.
As I've attended the BTAC meetings, there has been no separate discussion that this particular application for substantial understatement would apply solely to those taxpayers that file their renewals on a timely basis.
Okay. Does BTAC support it? What you're suggesting?
Council member, I can say that I don't know.
Okay, the city attorney says he doesn't know. Do you know?
I don't know if they support it or
Okay,
not.
so that's not plain fair. To come to this committee and offer a change without any vetting whatsoever, and nobody's here. I mean, I can't move it forward, but I'm just, you know, first of all, this draft was available when?
Our report was released on March 22nd.
March 22nd. And you come to me in the middle of a committee and ask me to change something substantively? And that's just not right. And I'm holding it because I really don't know what the ramifications are. And these matters are too serious, but I don't like that practice, so I hope you correct it in the future. So let's just move on to item number 3.
Item number 3 is a city attorney report and ordinance relative to amending section 21.03 of the Los Angeles Municipal Code to clarify that the business taxes of the city of LA apply to all businesses, including the reclassified tax categories set forth in sections 21.41 through 21.49.
Okay, do we have any reports on this item?
Councilman, in 2007, there was the business tax clarification that had several of the business tax classifications were consolidated into only 6 classifications. Prior to that, the business taxes were set forth in 2150 through 21.198. And currently, 21.03A refers to those previous tax classification sections. What we are doing with this ordinance is amending 21.03A to have the business tax apply to any section within the proper article that would impose a tax, so that it will now refer properly to any of the sections that impose a tax under our business tax ordinance, so that it will just be up to date and reflect the consolidation that occurred in 2007.
Okay, I have no cards on this item. We're awaiting Mr. Kokorian and Mr. Parks, but in the meantime, if they are not here and this meeting is adjourned, we will send that forward with a communication from the chairs to a recommendation for approval. Item number 4.
Item number 4 is a motion corrects Alarcon relative to drafting an ordinance which would make unpermitted filming a misdemeanor.
Good afternoon, Kimberly Miera, Deputy City Attorney from the City Attorney's Office.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Rich Llewellyn from the Office of Councilmember Paul Koretz. Thank you, sir, for scheduling this. We appreciate you hearing it again. And as you know, we've had complaints, even since we were here the last time, of unpermitted filming. The current structure focuses on the film company. Our concern is when a house repeatedly lets itself out to multiple film companies, the individual film company may not even know that this house has been a scene of frequent unpermitted filming. We know there was concerns about whether or not the very first time, what the right penalty was for that, and the city attorney has been working on that to try to address those concerns.
Yes, Councilman, I can speak to that. We can draft an ordinance to protect the innocent or one-time homeowner who might be unsophisticated in the way that the filming process works regarding allowing unpermitted activity to occur on their property, versus the homeowner that is constantly renting out their homes for reality shows or whatnot that are sort of a professional, a habitual renter of their property out for unpermitted filming, we could draft the ordinance, what we call as a wobblette, which would make it either fileable as an infraction or a misdemeanor. We also have built into anything that the city attorney files, we have the prosecutorial discretion to do nothing, not file the case, bring them in for a hearing, file it, like I said, as an infraction. We can draft the ordinance to include penalties for second and third violations. So those are some options before City Council.
Okay, the motion doesn't specify. Let me just hold on a second. Maybe it does. The motion per se does not separate those who are repetitive renters or owners of properties that that continuously rent. It just says make unpermitted filming a misdemeanor.
That's correct.
Councilmember, we think that the city attorney's idea to make this wobblette, which allows it to be filed as a misdemeanor in their prosecutorial discretion if it is an actor they consider a repeat offender, or just as an infraction, may address that, and we would accept that, and we would appreciate your support.
Okay, I also think under a wobblette, I've never heard of a wobblette. I've heard of wobbler. Why do you call it? What's the difference between a wobblette and a wobbler?
A wobbler is meaning a charge can be filed as a felony or a misdemeanor. So a wobblette is something that can be filed as an infraction or a misdemeanor. I didn't come up with the phrase.
One step below a wobbler, sir, is a wobblette.
That's right.
Wobbler light.
Wobbler light.
Wobbler light is the more gender correct term, I think, or gender friendly term. I'm not even sure that we want to have an infraction on the first offense, because quite often what happens is the owner. First of all, the fundamental question is whether we place the problem at the owner of the property or the company. Traditionally, what we're seeking to change here is the tradition that the filming company has a responsibility to be permitted. And we're saying now that it would be almost as if a company that uses or catering services for filming purposes, but the film company doesn't have a permit, and the caterer is doing something that bothers the community. But I don't know. This is the first time we're doing this, and I understand the desire, but I don't want to use overkill either. I think it's going to take some time for people to understand.
Well, Councilman, if I may, we do have an ordinance on the books that makes it illegal for a production company to conduct unpermitted filming. LAPD is currently citing or has cited homeowners under that ordinance, but it is really geared towards the production company. Where this motion came out of are homes that are being used to film reality shows repeatedly or adult filming, and it's the same homeowner allowing their home being used for unpermitted activity. This will be a double. It will get the production company as well as the homeowner, and we would recommend that a graduation occur towards the top end and not the bottom end.
Okay, there's two things I would like to change. Number one, I think we should include a warning somewhere in there. Okay. Number two, we should specify that if you're cited, it moves if you move, or if you own multiple properties. and you get cited at 1, then you're and then you rent out another property without a permit, then you can skip the warning.
So, sir, you're saying warning the first time, and any further, you can go right.
It runs with the
Fine.
owner. It
Yeah.
runs with the owner, not the property. They could own multiple properties. And then, of course, your language to allow for the city attorney to have discretion as to how serious the offense is, and whether the offender is flaunting the law or not. Essentially is what we're trying to do.
Right.
Okay, that would be my those would be my recommendations.
I just think we need to look at that one issue about owner versus property, because in our efforts of dealing with landlords, on dealing with folks that do not keep their property, the issue we found out with those things is that they changed ownership as fast as they got cited, yet the building never got fixed. And so I think we have to think about whether the owner is going to be there or whether the person in control of the property is going to be there. And you could have that rotate weekly by having a different person in place, but yet the building is the one that's creating the problem. So I just wouldn't want to give up location rather than person, because I know, I forget what it was, is that we found that out, I forget, Mr. Llewellyn, you remember dealing with the
Yes,
landlord?
Councilmember. I'm familiar with what you're saying, and it can be, in fact, the way the property is owned, who actually, whether it's some kind of LLC, a different LLC owns it, and it's hard to tag the owner as opposed to the location, which is the party house, the filming house, the foreclosed, the property that's fallen into disrepair.
And the thing, the person that's present may not be the owner, they just may be.
The property manager. So, sir, if you'll move it ahead with that, we'll ask the city attorney to make sure that when it comes back, it has that addressed as best they can. But we'll still, Mr. Alarcon can.
I'm not sure how you. I'm not sure how you can.
You may take care of that, sir.
I'm not sure how you can transfer that. I mean,
Well, sir, as you probably had in your district, there'll be cases where you're trying to get a property cleaned up, and in fact, the ownership it's a shifting ownership.
no, I understand that.
Normally, it's commercial, but a lot of these houses are commercially owned. They'll be owned by, these big houses in the hills, they'll be owned by an LLC. They'll be owned by some kind of real estate trust that ultimately is controlled by Mr. Alarcon somewhere, but it's hard to get to Mr. Alarcon. It's owned by the trust, and the property ownership can shift. So I understand your concern about making sure that it can be an effective tool.
Okay.
We will look to make sure that we can address those concerns.
Okay. Any other concerns? Okay, then, hearing no objection, that matter will be approved.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Counselor?
Thank you.
Mr. Chair?
Item number 5.
Item number 5 is the city treasurer and city attorney reports and ordinance relative to adding Article 3, Section 20.99.03 to Chapter 5.1, Division 20 of the Los Angeles Administrative Code to provide for the formation of a banking development district.
Could I just skip forward to items 7, 8, and 9? These are various bid actions, but we have no cards on any of them, and I'd like to send them out on consent if possible. That would be 7, 8, and 9. Any objection to putting those items on consent? Okay, then 7, 8, and 9 are approved on consent. Back to number 5. Mr. Treasurer.
Should I go on? Start. Good afternoon, Steve O'Neill, interim city treasurer. Really quickly, the report is in front of you. On November 9th, 2009, the city council directed the city treasurer to convene a task force that would come up with rules and regulations and the laws relating to the community, or rather the banking districts. At the same time, the city attorney was also asked to provide a draft ordinance that would put that into effect. Seems like a very long time, but the city attorney ordinance was forwarded about October last year. Subsequent to that, the office of the chair has been in touch with the Treasury, who asked us to report relative to that ordinance and the proposal. We have the report in front of you. The report, pretty much gives you options. That is phased out in 3 different phases. Takes a period of about 9 months to eventually put this together. The Treasury's report is slightly different than what the city attorney proposed. But in addition to that, we also got a call from the chair's office asking for potential inclusion into the task force, and we're okay with that. I'll be glad to
Okay,
answer.
what is the difference
Excuse me?
between the city attorney and the treasurer's report?
The city attorney and the treasurer's report, there's a slight difference in the composition of the task force, just
Okay.
a slight difference. 1 second for me. The city treasurer's proposal has the city treasurer, the mayor's office, the CLA, the controller in an advisory position, the city attorney in an advisory position, a city council representative, and the CAO. The city attorney's ordinance lists those members, does not necessarily have the city attorney and the controller in an advisory role, but in addition to that, also lists council members from council districts located in affected areas. Well, in effect, we don't know what the affected areas yet are.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to say that. So in addition to that, we also are providing a guideline in terms of timeline that what exactly we will need to do to be able to get there. We are a little more specific. But in addition to that, I also wanted to ask that we be given the opportunity to work with the city attorney and revise the ordinance a little bit to
Okay,
conform with that.
Okay, so a couple of questions. First of all, why were we asking that the city controller and city attorney be advisory?
The city controller, as you know, is kind of like the chief auditor for the city. And in order for the city, for the controller to come back later on and look at what we did, it is essential that they stay out of it, become advisory as opposed to becoming part of it. It's going to be a conflict of interest to audit what she or he has been a part of.
Okay, and the city attorney, same thing?
City attorney, pretty much the same thing. The advisors, and we don't want their views to get in the way of advice, legal advice. And therefore, we wanted them to be advisory as opposed to just being a member or members who would contribute in terms of logistical planning for the committee.
Okay. Does the city attorney have any concerns about that?
I don't know if it's absolutely necessary to codify whether a body is advisory or not. I mean, if it's advisory, you can call anybody, or the task force can call anybody to advise them,
Okay.
private or otherwise. The city attorney was not even part of the original group that was supposed to form
Okay.
the task force.
Okay, the second question I have relates to the involvement of the banking community, and it's difficult because there's many different communities of interest within the banking and credit union industry, and so how to incorporate a representative body would be very difficult. So I understand why you have not recommended that they be placed on the task force, and I concur with that. However, I do think they should have some involvement, and I would like to know how you would intend to reach out to the banks to allow all of those communities of interest to step forward and make comments to the task force.
I totally agree, Council Member. One thing you will realize here is that the initial group that we have here is really an initial group, after which we will still sit together and come up with different other, or rather, let me just say other members. We were looking at the state of New York, who has done this over the last few years. They've been successful in doing this. I want to say that the program is a little more robust in that they have a banking department. In addition to having a banking department, they also have a banking commission. Having said that, just bear with me a second. Having said that, just like you had said earlier, that there are various interests within the banking industry, we felt, or I felt, that it would be better to get some neutral party. And there is California Bankers Association or American Bankers Association. We could just pick a member from there. And I want to believe that in just picking a member of the association, maybe an office bearer, it would be much more impartial than picking somebody from a smaller banking or a state chartered bank versus a federal chartered bank.
I understand that, but I think it would be important for us to have a way that banks could submit information to the task force.
This is going to be because it's being formed by the power of the City Council, it's going to be a Brown Act meeting, and therefore any member of the public is at liberty to submit any comments or come in and talk about any issues they want.
Okay, but more than that, can we invite banks in?
Yes, it is my intent, like I said,
Great.
To invite somebody from either California Bankers Association or the American Bankers Association.
I'll work with you on that list because, like I said, it's a very diverse group. For example, the credit unions and banks are, they have two separate communities of interest, and that's just one example. Large banks versus small banks. Large banks meaning national banks versus small community banks. They have a different community of interest.
Well, alternatively, we could pick a member from each interest group.
Yeah, if we could define them. Okay, but I just want to make sure that they do have a way to submit testimony or provide information to the task force. First, let me thank the interim city treasurer for coming back with these recommendations. I do think they are very good. They can move us forward expeditiously, and hopefully we'll produce some results shortly.
Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to take public testimony, unless my colleagues have questions of Mr. Ngali.
Question. Let me ask, Steve, when you talk about the listing of the banking community, have you considered, I think there's a minority banking association, which often, as we've talked before, that those communities have a tendency not to be discussed, and I think we have a program that we allow investments into smaller minority banks, and so if we could look at that as a part of that banking community and that association to be a part. The other thing I was wondering about from our own city family, when we think about other kinds of incentives, whether the CRA and CDD should be a part of the group, because if empowerment zones continue, or CRA with their different tools that are available within a area, and it looks like they may be around, and so it would be something to think about how they play in this arena as far as incentives and other things. And then the other one I was going to ask is that on many of these issues, and you said this is going to be a task force that's under the Brown Act. I'm wondering, do we really want that level of paperwork and thrust upon a meeting when you're trying to create a response to an issue, or and I don't know what the requirements are to make something a Brown Act meeting, but it would appear we've had those, and I think you have one already in Treasurer where it's advisory, and you don't have to deal with all of the requirements and record keeping and posting and all those other things. I'm just wondering, does it benefit you to have that formalized of a structure when you're trying to work primarily in-house with different departments to create a policy that's going to eventually have to come here anyway?
I will start with your last question, which has to do with, is it better to have a Brown Act meeting or a non-Brown Act meeting? If this is going to be formed by the power of City Council instructing us to convene this task force and to have a hand in even selecting the members, I do believe that by default, the charter calls for anybody that is created by the power of City Council become a Brown Act body. And so I don't know how to go around that.
I don't know how you get around it, but I just wonder whether the workload from the city clerk and everything else gets engulfed in that whole issue of Brown Act and agendas and posting and
It is certainly much more, and I have experienced it in the past with all the Brown Act task forces. And
I would like to ask the city attorney, because I don't believe the Brown Act is triggered by an advisory committee.
And not by an advisory committee. The city attorney's office is taking the position that if the body is clearly advisory, specifies so in the ordinance, then it's not a Brown Act body.
Okay, so
Therefore, this Form 700 doesn't have to be filled out, and other requirements don't have to be met.
Okay.
It has to be, obviously, the draft would have to be changed and to specify. There is precedent for that in the city.
I would think they get more work done.
Yeah, but I would also like to direct that the task force work with the banking community and set up a process to allow them to contribute and reach out to them more than just wait to hear from them.
that will be done, Councilmember.
Okay, thank you.
So just to answer the other questions that Councilmember Parks had, you also talked about minority banking groups meeting with them. As you're aware, this is just one of two ordinances that we're working on relative to banking. We're also working with responsible banking ordinance, where we are meeting with all sorts of groups. I was told we're supposed to be reporting to Budget and Finance next Monday. I don't know if that's still on, but just to help facilitate that, I'm actually meeting with a group this week, and whatever it is that they tell me will be a part of the report. And I want to believe that part of what they want to ask me is to allow them to be involved. So, I mean, we can have them in both ways. The only thing that I have to tell you is that for us, being a very, very small department of, just about, 27 people, it's not very easy what we have to.
Well, I don't see a conflict between the two ordinances. In fact, there may be some synergy. You could meet with them once and have two subjects if you choose, but if we don't have their input, then it just sets it up to create controversy when you bring your proposal up.
No, we will certainly make room to try and include them. But I just want you to know that currently we do have a program within the Treasury that actually does deposits with minority banks who are interested. That program is called the CDAS program. We have about $10 million that's invested with minority and smaller local banks within the area. So we're already doing that with or without the ordinance.
No, but the reason I bring it up is if it were not for One United and Broadway Federal in the 8th District, that's been the expansion of banking beyond any other branches. And that's two minority branches.
Yeah, but I also would like to mention that this program, the program that you speak of, may very well be banking development, and at the same time fit into the notion of responsible banking. I don't see the conflict.
No, well, there's no conflict, but to an extent, there is some redundancy. And that's why I'm talking about the amount of workload that, we do it this side and then we do it the other side.
Well, but what I'm saying is you could get credit for both, for one action.
Certainly. I'm not crazy about credits though, but.
No. No, but I'm serious. I mean, I think they're all in the same vein, and being the maker of both motions, I think I can say with some degree of confidence that they're working along the same path. It's just a question of specificity, where banking responsibility is a much more broad issue. The banking development district is a more specific part of banking responsibility. So I don't see them in conflict. And
Oh, no, certainly no conflict.
I do have a couple of technical changes. It says city council representative. I would like to recommend to my colleagues that we change that to a representative of the chairman of the Jobs and Business Development Committee, since I introduced the motion and marshaled this, and this committee has a responsibility to bring it back. I would like to specify that because I don't know.
Actually, Councilmember, I totally agree with that. And that's what I stated was part of the difference between our report and the city attorney's report. The city attorney's report stated here that council members from council districts located in affected areas, we don't even know what the affected areas are, and so we felt that it would be better to just
Then
have
let me just
one
say that when we
representative
figure out what those areas are, then we'll certainly bring those council members in. I mean, that would be my recommendation. I mean, it would only build the momentum, I think. So I have no problem with that. I think it's a good recommendation if we had a specific definition of what banking development districts are. But once we get that and we can define what those districts are, we'd be happy to bring them in.
Right.
So if you don't have a problem with that, I'd like to move that. I also like to specifically add the director of Bank on Los Angeles, which is a staff member in the community development department. But it's very much what they do, and they would have a lot of good advice in this regard. There's no objection. Okay, with that, then we will move forward with public comment. We have Ann Williams from CCA.
Councilmember, just for clarification, I take it that you have authorized us to work with the city attorney and just amend the ordinance to make sure that it conforms with what we've talked about here this afternoon.
Well, at this point, all we're doing is developing a task force, right?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
So do we need an ordinance? I thought the task force was going to work to develop an ordinance.
Well, at this point, certainly developing the task force doesn't require an ordinance. However, there is an ordinance before you right now, so you either just file it and instruct the treasurer to proceed with the creation of the task force, or we amend the ordinance to give more specific guidance pursuant to, of course, your instructions.
Okay. Let me be clear.
This ordinance was prepared initially based on the CLA.
I don't know. I'm thinking I'd really like to have the task force come back with recommendations about the ordinance.
Sure. I totally agree.
Okay, so I don't think we need an ordinance.
Okay. I agree.
Okay, and you're okay with that, and it will give you guidance. Otherwise, you're going to have to come back and do another ordinance. And I see no purpose of that. Okay, I apologize for the miscommunication there. Okay, so Ann.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Williams with the Central City Association, and I appeared before this committee on this issue in January, and I don't think much has materially changed since then, so I'll just be brief. Our main concern, as you know, is that this banking development district proposal describes ways to incentivize bricks and mortar banks to open in underbanked parts of the city. And putting aside whether or not we agree that physical bank branches are going to be a relic of the 20th century in the near future, we believe that in this terrible budget environment, any incentives are quickly going to mutate into mandates or penalties because there's just simply no money for real incentives. So if the city does move forward with some sort of incentive program, we ask that the funds for these incentives be identified first. Otherwise, the creation of an incentive program is just an exercise in futility. So we look forward to working on this with you more. Thanks.
Thank you. Jessica, where are my glasses on? Duba? The LA Chamber?
Good afternoon. My name is Jessica Duboff. I'm with the LA Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber continues to believe that the city may be putting the cart before the horse on this issue. The city should first understand the trends in banking, such as the influence of online banking and what type of market drives brick-and-mortar building. The city must also explore reasons why citizens prefer check cashing options when banks are available. If we don't understand the needs of this sector, simply putting in more bank buildings will not change the behavior. Today's retail financial services market is very competitive, and non-traditional players have changed people's relationship with traditional banking. And as you just discussed, the city must make implicit in their instructions that the task force must reach out to a large contingent of the banking community for feedback and input. We look forward to continuing to work on this with you. Thank you.
Thank you. For my part, I just want to make a statement that I'm very well aware of the needs of my district, where we have probably 5 or 6, maybe 10 check cashing locations for every banking institution. With regard to the digital divide, anybody that knows my district knows that we don't have a lot of computers at home, and people aren't using computers to do their banking services. That's why we have 300,000 unbanked people in Los Angeles, or unbanked families, I should say. So that's exactly the heart of the issue. If we could get them online, it would be fine, but they don't even have computers. So I think this is still very pertinent to some communities, but many of those communities are communities that banks love to ignore, or when they do pay attention to them, they're ripping them off. So that's exactly why we're doing this. Is there any more commentary? Or?
Just one quick point, Mr. Chair. I think it's very valuable to reach out and get the broad cross-section of the banking industry as you've requested. I think it would also be helpful to have the input of the borrower community as well, aside from consumers, small businesses, minority-owned small businesses, the minority chambers, and the impacted communities.
Oh, what did you call them?
Borrowers.
Borrowers,
not
borrowers.
Not bar owners.
Bar owners.
No. Those small businesses in particular that would be able to take advantage of having a greater banking presence because of a better ability to have access to credit. I think it would be valuable to have their input as well in setting forth the what would be most helpful to them in an ordinance like this as we move forward. So I would just suggest that we do additional outreach in addition to the banking industry to the small business community as well in the impacted areas.
I don't think the task force would have any problem with that. Mr. Angale, you would agree? Okay. So with that, then we'll send this on to council with an approval as recommended to establish a task force not driven by an ordinance but advisory to the city council to do the work as delineated in the report. Hearing no objection, that matter is approved. And item number 6.
Item number 6 is a verbal report from the Chief Legislative Analyst and the City Administrative Officer relative to the economic impact that Japanese events will have on the City of Los Angeles pursuant to motion Alarcon Han. Councilman Felipe Chavez with the CLA's office.
Please.
At the joint meeting of the Jobs and Business Development, Trade, Commerce, Tourism Committees on April 4th, both committees instructed the CLA and CAO to provide biweekly updates.
Was it Mr. Parks? Was there any item that Mr. Parks could add on to?
Item number 3.
Number 3? Item number 3, you want to add on to that? And Mr. Krikorian, would you like to make that a unanimous decision? Item number 3 is relative to some work we've been doing with BTAC and tax classifications. Okay, so that matter is approved by the committee. Back to item number 6.
Yes, both committees instructed the CLA and the CAO to provide biweekly updates in terms of the impact that the Japanese tragedy has had on, or is having, or could have on the LA economy. And our office has been working with the CAO and also the LAWA and the Harbor Department to obtain information. There is not a lot of new information at this point, but we're still working with them. There are 2 points, one each provided by LAWA and the Port of LA. Shortly after the earthquake, I believe Delta suspended their flights from LAX to Haneda, and there are news that they will resume service in June. Okay. So that is good news. Also, the Port of LA reports that as the Jobs Committee requested that it waive its tariff for shippers who deliver donated goods, that has happened. They've issued a letter to allow that to happen.
Great. This is a continued disaster. It hasn't stopped happening. So I'm particularly concerned with the issues related to the nuclear disaster. And it doesn't seem to be getting better. I don't know if it's getting worse, but it's certainly not getting better. So typically in major disasters, it's sort of, there's a period of time when the disaster occurs. It's not our typical experience to look at ongoing disasters like this one to assess economic impact. So it increases our challenge. But the traditional thinking is that after a disaster, within a year thereafter, there's a boom in economic activity. So the question is whether or not an ongoing disaster would change that historical thinking. I'd rather ask you than answer the question myself, so that's why I'm
If you have an answer, I'll take notes.
But if you would just take note of the question, I think is the important thing, and factor into, there has to be some kind of asterisk at least to say we really can't predict what might occur, but we should be, how would we prepare if we make assumptions, a variety of assumptions? Do we have various courses of actions that we would take depending on which assumptions become truth?
Just to join in the questions, but not the answers. The questions, there's a lot of variables always out there, and this just intensifies that. And it intensifies it by a whole lot. But essentially, what we don't know often way exceeds what we do know. This is difficult because exactly the model that comes to my mind is the Northridge earthquake and the tremendous recovery that came, like you say, within a year afterwards. This may or may not be the case. We just don't know. The Japanese government increased I'm going to call it the alert level. Doesn't mean that the situation's worse. It means they're taking note of it right now. So what it will have on in the immediate effect, the Los Angeles economy just isn't known, and going beyond that is just, we're just going to have to wait and see. It's a very good question because it may not be over.
Well, I just wanted to make note that this is an ongoing disaster that we'll need continuous reports on relative to its impact on Los Angeles. The human efforts will continue, and those are good things. But in terms of the economic recovery, I mean, we need to put in place strategies to respond. Where there are shortages, we need to find markets. If we are not going to be getting 305,000 tourists from Japan, how are we going to shore that up? I don't think marketing to Japan is going to be the answer to that question. So we want to hear from LA Inc. How are you going to recover from those potentially 100,000 or more visitors lost? And more importantly, the $270 million that they spend. So that's one.
Awesome.
Oh, one question.
Well, we are scheduled to report back in about 60 days, and we'll be sure to address those issues then.
Okay, well, we just want to, I think at least until we can say the nuclear situation is in hand and definable, we should continue to get updates on any ramifications. Are we, so you mentioned the harbor and airports. We also want to mention the LA Inc. organization, which I think is critical because what we learned in the two hearings that we had, I think, at least it was my perception, that the most serious effect on our economy is going to be in our tourist industry, not in our port activity and not in our airport activity. Excuse me, I haven't figured out how to turn my phone off. But it's going to definitely impact our tourist industry, and I want to know what our reaction to that is going to be. So, Mr. Krikorian?
Yeah, if I may, I think it's really important for us to stay ahead of the curve on this. But while there are going to be direct impacts, such as the short-term loss of tourism coming from Japan, there may also be offsetting factors, such as, I don't want to sound as though we're trying to take advantage of the unfortunate situation in Japan, but there will also be less tourism in Japan, and therefore other markets like ours might actually receive some countervailing offsetting benefit from that. Similarly, there are products perhaps that our marketplace here will, for the short term, not want to be purchasing or will not be able to be purchasing from Japan, which might be areas that will be a positive impact in our local economy. Another issue, the Chairman mentioned the ongoing nuclear disaster. That's creating, fairly or unfairly, some amount of fears of radiation and its impact here in California, including in agricultural items. I would like to be able to address that in Los Angeles with some strategy that will alleviate the unfounded fears about things that, like dairy products and so on here, that are produced here, that they're finding trace degrees of radiation in that don't impact health at all. But I think what my concern is that the mere presence of that publicity might actually be having a injurious effect on jobs in certain areas here in Southern California as well. So I think this ongoing report is very important, and I would hope that it encompasses some of those indirect impacts as well, both positive and negative, so that we can develop policies that might be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are created, while at the same time addressing the negative impacts.
We don't have any cards on this item. I think we're going to hold. We'll continue this item for approximately 4 weeks, and then we'll come back and have more discussion. We'll have much more clarity by then, I hope. Okay, thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned. I think all matters are. Oh, one more. Oh, which one?
Number 10.
Was that why all you people are here? Oh, I'm sorry. What, item number 10?
Item number 10 is a Community Development Department report relative to a draft of the Year 12 Workforce Investment Board Annual Plan for 2011-2012.
Good afternoon, Manny Chavez with the Community Development Department. What you have before you is the draft Workforce Investment Board Annual Plan for the 2011-2012 program year. The plan allocates all of the Workforce Investment Act dollars that are made available to the city on an annual basis. It identifies the service providers that we're proposing to fund for the forthcoming year. All of the service strategies as identified are approved by the workforce investment boards themselves, as well as policies that actually govern the implementation of the various programs that we fund. Procedurally speaking, this is kind of going in reverse order this year, in that we're kicking off the public comment period here at the committee. The document will be open for comment essentially over the next 20 to 30 days. It will be presented to the various WIB committees that have oversight of the WIA funds, and ultimately would be presented to them, to the executive committee of the WIB for approval in early May. Thereafter, we would formally transmit to City Council and Mayor for your consideration. The major issues that are facing us in terms of what we're looking at for next year, obviously, number one is the budget. Just today, we were advised of a federal reduction in WIA funds of roughly 6.5%. The direct impact on the city is unknown, given our unemployment rate and how high it is. We hope that it will not be 6.5%, possibly a little bit less than that, but only time will tell, as we're advised with the actual allocations by the state. We did propose or anticipate level funding in preparing this document, so the formula dollars are equal to last year. We did, of course, experience a loss of all of our ARA revenue. Our ARA revenue expires June 30th of this year. The biggest single impact there is the loss of funds for summer jobs. There were $25 million last year that were made available to the city, which employed 9,000 or 9,400 kids.
I didn't understand. Did you say you have calculated that into this report, or?
Correct.
The figure is the same as last year.
The formula dollars that are available to us, or the entitlement dollars, if you will.
You assume the same level.
Correct. It's roughly 41.
But the ARA money you have incorporated into this report.
Correct.
Okay.
What we have done to attempt to fill the gap is to expend as much of 100% of the ARA revenue, which created a formula fund savings for us. So we are anticipating approximately $10 million in carryover going into next year, which will help us see through that 6.5% reduction, which, if you do the math, is about $2.7 million that we would be facing a reduction in.
But that wouldn't capture the $25 million.
No, it would not.
Funding. So our summer youth employment program may have to take a heavy hit this year.
There are no funds in this budget for summer jobs.
Not at all.
Nothing at all. There is no revenue to support it. And that, of course, is the major obstacle that we face this year.
Okay. Are we looking at any other options to how we might fund the youth program?
I think we're following the Fed's lead on this. We're looking to try to generate some, Greg Irish, by the way, Workforce Investment Board. We're trying to generate some interest in private sector employers actually trying to fill the gap. It's impossible to fill the gap for $25 million. The Secretary of Labor is kicking off this week an attempt to convince some of the major corporations who have activities that span the entire country to hire, but there is no way we're going to make up for 14,000 plus young folks in $25 million. So we won't have a public investment in summer jobs. We just, and actually the WIA money that we have, the formula money, there are prohibitions against using it for summer. There are some year-round activities that we have, but it's not going to make up for the loss of $25 million.
Again, the total amount was how much for summer youth employment?
It was $25 million were awarded to us for last summer.
Okay.
And there's zero this year.
If council members could find resources, could you develop the program?
We expect to have a program. What we're going to do is we're going to count, of course, some of the young folks that are hired by city departments, but as you know, the local budget's stressed. We're going to try for a private sector program, and if the council can come up with some money, that's another issue. We don't anticipate a local fund contribution to summer jobs.
Okay, but what I'm saying is if individual council members can find money in their own resources, could you manage that program?
It would help, yes. We're ready to hire young folks contingent upon how much money we're able to generate.
And where it comes from?
Yes. I'm sure if you contribute, you'd want those young people to come from your council district, of course.
It's a good assumption. Mr. Krikorian? Well, the youth portion is very sad, but we still rely on this program heavily moving forward, and so I think our greatest challenge is not our intent to approve this report, because you still want to get some more input.
Yeah.
And then also the numbers are moving around a little bit, so we will have a better idea.
They will fluctuate, Mr. Chair. Again, we're talking about a 6% cut, but if you recall, that cut was the continuing resolution, which means we're concluding this federal fiscal year. The federal fiscal year is, of course, October 1st through September 30th. Next year's budget also impacts us because we get split year funding, because our program year goes from July 1st, much like our budget, and California's budget, July 1st through June 30th. So the battle begins anew, because the president's next year's budget includes formula funds as well. So we'll be updating you as to the changes based on what happens in Washington.
Okay, then we are going to continue this matter in committee and expect a report back in approximately 4 weeks?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
By the way, we'd like to sit down with you to see, and my chief of staff is in the room, to see if there might be funds that we might be able to cobble together to impact my district, and in fact, work with you on a memo to all of my colleagues to inform them of the loss of summer youth employment, and ask them if they would be interested in developing a program, and letting them know that you would pick up the administration, well, not pick it up, but you would provide administration for that kind of program. So I'd like to work with you on both, personally with my council district, to see if we can generate some money, and then with a letter to my colleagues to let them know that we're going to lose this program, and that they could design their own program with you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now can I say the meeting is adjourned? Okay, everybody's saying yes, so this meeting is now officially adjourned.